What happened? What happened to the video and to the audio? Because I'm not hearing anything.
Has not started yet.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the 20th webinar for the Water Resource Institute. We are still waiting for just a few members to join us. I think we'll be starting in the next 2-3 minutes. Thank you. Yes, good morning once again. My name is Christophe Francis Xavier from the Water Resources Institute. I want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the 20th Water Resources Institute monthly webinar. This webinar, we have a special guest who will be introduced by one of our partners. This webinar is organized in partnership with Engineers Without Borders, East Africa, and we'll have a discussion, a presentation from Dr. Amadei, who is based in US. And this being an interesting subject, it's a topic where we are going to look at harnessing innovations and partnerships to integrate water, energy, land, food, health, and education for the tangible community resilience. I understand Hopefully everyone is hearing me.
Yes, you're audible.
Francis, we can hear you.
We are hearing you.
Thank
Loud
you very
and
much.
clear.
Yes.
We are hearing.
At this juncture, I want to invite Engineer Peter Zamandita from Engineers Without Borders to tell us about Engineers Without Borders in general. And after his presentation, he will invite the presenter for the day. Then we'll have a discussion where we'll have questions and answers from the participants, and the presenter will be in position to respond to the questions. Thank you very much. I hand over to you, Engineer Peter.
Thank you so much, Francis. My name is Peter Nzabanita, and I am the Executive Director for Engineers Without Borders East Africa. I'm also a member of the Engineers Without Borders International, a board member. Good morning, good afternoon, our distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you to this important webinar on the Nexus approach, jointly organized by the Ministry of Water and Environment's Water Resources Institute, Engineers Without Borders East Africa. This collaboration and your individual presence demonstrates our shared commitment to addressing the interconnected challenges of water, energy, land, food security, health, and education. Together, we aim to develop solutions that resonate with the complexities of sustainable development in Uganda and beyond. As the Executive Director for Engineers Without Borders East Africa, I'm honored to represent an organization that is part of the broader Engineers Without Borders International Network. Engineers Without Borders East Africa, like other global EWBs, exists to bridge the gap between engineering expertise and community needs, driving impactful and sustainable solutions that empower and transform communities while ensuring young engineers and other related professionals are engaged in practical learning on how to solve real-life community challenges. Our mission is clear: to partner with communities and develop leaders to build a better world. We build on local capacities and wisdom. We believe that by integrating engineering solutions with local knowledge and global expertise, we can address the most pressing challenges facing our communities, from water scarcity to energy access and beyond. Today's discussion is very important. In the room, we have practitioners, UN agencies, representatives, NGOs, experts, donors, philanthropists, academia, and students, all of whom have shown and that they care and they have a common interest in the Nexus approach. The interconnections between water, energy, land, food, health, and education are more evident now than ever before. And it is our collective responsibility to harness these linkages to create sustainable, resilient communities. I encourage all of us to actively engage, share your insights, and explore the synergies that can emerge from this rich, diverse gathering of minds. It is now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Bernard Amadei, a visionary engineer and the founder of Engineers Without Borders USA and Engineers Without Borders International, a global movement. Dr. Amadei is a retiring distinguished professor of civil engineering at the University of Colorado, Boulder, and has dedicated his career to promoting the role of engineering in addressing global challenges. His work has inspired a movement that now spans over 60 countries, with thousands of engineers working on projects that improve the lives and protect the planet. Dr. Amadei's efforts have demonstrated the power of social engineering to catalyze positive change, particularly in the underserved communities. His approach to community-driven sustainable engineering has set the standard for what is possible when you combine technical expertise with a deep understanding of local context. Today, he will share his insights on the next approach drawing on his extensive experience and visionary thinking. To think critically and creatively about our roles and how we continue to work together in achieving sustainable development. Dr. Bernard Amadei, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Peter. Just give me a minute as I arrange my computer here so that I have a big screen in front of me. So good morning, everyone, and thank you, Peter, for the invitation. It's indeed a great honor and a great pleasure to give the 20th Water Research Institute seminar today. It's 11 o'clock your time, it's 2 o'clock in the morning my time. So hopefully I will not fall asleep during my presentation. Just a joke. What I want to, my seminar today, as mentioned earlier, is about the role of engineering in addressing the nexus between water, energy, land, food, health, and education. I'm going to expand it to a little bit more than those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 topics. And I'm going to address what I'm going to call the WELFX nexus, which is water, energy, land, food on one side, and X can represent many other things that interact with water, energy, land, and food. The message I want to send in my presentation today is that addressing the nexus requires a systems approach. And it requires engineers to learn to be system thinkers. We cannot use the methods of the past, the tools of the past that are more linear and more deterministic to address nexus issues. When we talk about nexus, we talk about linkages between different components. And those linkages, as you will see in my presentation, can be hard at times to identify, to model, to predict, and the solutions that we need to develop need to reflect essentially the systemic approach or systemic nature of the nexus. Before I start my presentation, I want to remind, I always like to remind engineers, why are we here? What's our role essentially on the planet today? Regardless of where you are, in wherever country you are, I think for us engineers, our mission is to provide, I'm sorry, I think it's on a timer. Our mission is to provide clean water, sanitation, energy, shelter, and so on and so forth, so that all humans have fulfilling lives, meet their basic needs, and live with dignity and peace. A gentle reminder to all of us that engineering is not just about technology. Engineering is about solutions that are the right solutions for the people and the environment, solutions that are rightly done from an engineering point of view, and solutions that are developed for the right essential reasons. So I call that the 3 R's. With that in mind, let's talk about the nexus. So I mentioned earlier that the nexus essentially deals with linkages, connections. We talk about, you may have heard about the water energy nexus. That's the first nexus that came essentially on the radar screen when people realized that water and energy depend on each other. Water essentially requires energy to pump, to store, to distribute, to clean, to dispose. And likewise, water can also be a source of power in hydropower. So it's essentially water has an effect on energy. Now, if we look at the water, energy, land, food nexus, and that's a book that I published a few years ago, I look more specifically there at how water, energy, food, and land interact. We can represent that interaction in the form of tetrahedron, where the center here is X. X could be climate, X could be health, X could be education, X could be many different things, climate change, what have you, and peace and conflict, right? So essentially that's one representation. Another representation on the left-hand side here shows how energy essentially affects food, food affects water, food affects energy, food affects water, water affects energy, and so on and so forth. So really the challenge for us engineers, if we are interested in the water, energy, land, food nexus, is to try to comprehend such interaction. It's not easy. We need data about each sector of the nexus, but we also need data to understand how one sector is interacting with the other three sectors. So that's one nexus that I'm going to talk about today. Another nexus that I became interested in is the nexus relating peace or conflict, or violent conflict, sustainability, and climate security. So in this case here, we have three parameters that are also interacting with water, energy, land, and food, and so on. But more specifically, essentially, sustainability has an impact on peace. Peace has an impact on sustainability. Peace has an impact on climate security, and so on and so forth. And that nexus essentially takes place in a landscape which is contextual, which is socio-economic, environmental, it has infrastructure, it has capital, and so on. This type of nexus is very important. In fact, for us engineers, it's one of the most critical nexuses that we need to take care of. Why? Well, if we talk about a sustainable community, the nexus is telling us that a sustainable community needs to be peaceful and need to be climate secure. A peaceful community has not endorsed sustainable practices and does not support climate adaptation and mitigation. That makes no sense. And a climate secured community that has not endorsed sustainable practices and is geopolitically unstable will not last essentially as a secured community. So a sustainable community is a peaceful community. A peaceful community is a community that has endorsed sustainable practices and essentially has integrated climate adaptation and mitigation. And a climate secured community is a community that has endorsed sustainable practices and is geopolitically unstable. But community I'm talking about here could be a small village, it can be a town, it can be a city, it can be essentially a country. Again, it's important to take under consideration the scale and the context in which we are working here. The solutions, of course, the engineering solutions at the community level are going to be different than the solutions at the country level, and also in different countries around the planet. So here's an example, another type of nexus. I just want to show you different types of nexus. Here's a nexus that essentially relates geography, where you are on the planet, and the climate crisis, and the types of conflict that are likely to take place for different types of climate change effects. So climate stressors on the middle, left the geography, and right the type of conflict. Let's look at Eastern Africa. You can see that according to this diagram here, and it's based on very large literature review, in Eastern Africa, we can expect essentially, if we follow the orange line here, some generic type of climate change issues. We can also expect water stress, and you can see that water stress can manifest itself in different forms. Could be civil conflict, could be crime, it can be violence, it can be intrastate conflict from transboundary issues, for instance, or from one country to another, political conflict and social conflict. So there's a lot, of course, in this diagram, but it shows that nexus between geography, location, the type of climate stressor that you have, the dominant climate stressor, and conflict are all related, right? So it's important to understand that. So the bottom line, you can see that there are many different... What the heck is going on? Hello? Okay, maybe someone needs to turn off their computer there. That would be nice. So let's look more specifically at the community and look at the issue of community development, human development, and human security. Well, here's an example of some generic, essentially, diagram showing the different types of system. So when we talk about nexus, we need to understand the different systems that are at play in a nexus. One, in general, we can expect whether you're a community in Africa, a community in Russia, and a community in France, or a community in the United States, you're going to have some human systems. you're going to have some infrastructure system. And for us engineers, we really like infrastructure system. We have different forms of capital. We have natural system and economic system. All those systems interact. So from an engineering point of view, if we use a systems approach, use a nexus approach, we need to take under consideration those different types of system and subsystems if we want to develop more holistic solutions. The traditional approach in engineering, the way I've trained engineers for a long time, until I would say the past 10 years, essentially is to teach engineers to look at vertical silos, the water silos, the energy silos, the transportation silo, when most of the problems at the community level are essentially across disciplines. So I think it's important, the message I want to convey throughout my presentation, and I will conclude with that at the end of the presentation, is the need for training the new generation of engineers for the 21st century to look at problems or community problems as the interaction of multiple systems. Now, it's not easy, of course, because we need to collect data for each one of those systems and subsystems. We need to collect data about the interaction of those systems. But if we don't do that, we're going to develop some solutions that are extremely deterministic and solutions that are most likely to be false and harmful essentially to the people in the community. So when we look on the right-hand side here is the WELF nexus, water, energy, land, food. X can be, as I mentioned earlier, health, education, shelter, peace, climate change, and so on. So we need to, when we talk about security, water security, energy security, land security, food security, health security, shelter security, we can look at what we call nexus security. And nexus security depends on many different parameters that are essentially context and scale specific. How do those systems interact? Well, here's one way of representing them. Here's a 4x4 matrix, essentially showing how human systems, the way you read a matrix like this, is that if you go horizontal, if you follow a row, that shows the influence of human systems on natural systems, human systems on engineered systems, human systems on economic system, human system on natural hazards. And vertically, that's the dependence. Engineered systems depends on human system. Engineered systems depend on natural system. Engineered systems depend on economic system. And engineered systems are going to be affected by natural hazards. And natural hazards, they're essentially that are going to be that may take place without the engineering system, the infrastructure system. But the infrastructure system may enhance essentially the natural hazards because of poor engineering design and planning. So this is one way of representing essentially, as we will see later on, it is possible to quantify, semi-quantify such interactions by using numbers, for instance, between 1 and 3 to indicate the influence of each system on the others or the dependence of one system on the others. But bottom line is this matrix here shows that if we look at the nexus between water, energy, land, food, and whatever you want, X there, we need to take under consideration the interaction of multiple systems that essentially control that nexus. There's no doubt about it. And I know I only have 45 minutes to present how to do that. There's more to it than obviously what I'm going to talk about today. I'm trying to simplify it and may confuse you. In one way, it's good to confuse people because people react when they are confused. So the bottom line is that we need to understand how those systems interact. The water, energy, land, food nexus, community resilience depend on the interaction of those systems. And one way of representing such interactions is to use vertical silos here, social system, economic system, infrastructure system, environmental system, and other systems you can think of. And if you look at an engineering project, it cuts across many disciplines. Diplomacy cuts across many disciplines. Peace building cuts across many disciplines. So we have a nexus and we have other nexuses. So the picture I'm trying to show you is that when you look at human development, and we look at human development and security and community development, we need to look at multiple interactions between water, energy, land, food, blah, 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 but also between the systems that essentially are interacting with water, energy, land, food. The traditional approach, again, I mean, it sounds like a broken record. The traditional approach of engineering education is essentially to put people into a box, a vertical silo, without taking under consideration the other systems that they interact with engineering systems. It's a disaster. It's a big mistake that has been made in the past. Why? Because of unintended consequences. The success of an infrastructure system or an engineering systems depends a great deal on the people, depends a great deal on the environment, it depends a great deal on the economy, and it really depends on different forms of capital that are available. Engineering, again, engineering, as I mentioned earlier, is not about technology. Engineering is about solutions. Solutions that are good for the people and the environment, that are done right from an engineering point of view, that we cannot ignore, but again, solutions that are developed for the right reasons. We don't always need the engineering that some people want to have. It has to be done for the right reason. So this picture here is quite complex. I'm sure I have confused you by now, and that's okay. And I think confusion is usually a good way to start, and to start a new path, a new road, essentially, to start walking a new road. Again, my new road here is a systems approach. If I look at an engineering project, I need to look at not just the infrastructure, and you all know that, you have practice engineering, but we also need to look at other systems that are interacting with the infrastructure. On top of that, not only what's happening at a community level stays at the community level, we need to look at what's happening at the local level, depends a great deal. What's happening at the regional level, at the country level, at the regional level, even larger regional level, and what have you there. We have to deal with as engineers, we have to deal with a lot of world issues that are becoming more and more critical in the 21st century. So the engineers of the 21st century is going to be quite different from the engineer of the 20th century. As I mentioned in one of my presentations to the engineering community in Uganda, how do we educate the engineer in Uganda of 2030? How does he or she look like? What kind of education do we want that person to have so that that person can essentially interact, can maneuver and make decisions across different disciplines and across those issues there that are beyond the country of Uganda. We all know that. I mean, the climate change does not stop along borders. Water issues do not stop at the borders. The transboundary issues are essentially everywhere on the planet. How do we train engineers essentially to deal with such global issues that are themselves interconnected? I don't want to go into the details of this diagram. That's from the World Economic Forum, and they want to read it, and that's the 2024 edition. That essentially shows a bunch of issues, and those issues essentially create risk. By risk here, here's an equation that I've used in the past. Risk depends on the event. That could be climate issue, it can be a war, it can be a conflict, it can be natural hazards. What is the magnitude of the event? What's the level of exposure? I mean, if you have, I don't know, a flood at the middle of the Sahara, the exposure to human beings is zero. So in that case, the risk is zero. But imagine a huge flood in Amadei, the exposure is going to be equal to 100%. So the risk depends on the level of exposure to an event and the ratio between the vulnerability of the community divided by its capacity. Higher is the vulnerability, higher is the risk to an event, higher is the capacity of the community to handle the risk, lower is the risk, right? So that's another way of looking at essentially a resilient community. A resilient community has more capacity than vulnerability. That's one way of looking at it, right? So a resilient community can bounce back. Resilience has to do with bouncing back, and a community is going to bounce back more if it has capacity to start with and it's not vulnerable, right? So that, like mitigation, adaptation, and climate change, are essentially ways of increasing capacity and in decreasing vulnerability as a result of this equation, in decreasing the level of risk. Why are we talking about all those things? About what are we talking about the nexus? Well, if you look at what's going to happen by 2050, here's a diagram that shows essentially energy consumption in 2050, water consumption in 2050, and food consumption in 2050 worldwide. We can expect some major needs, essentially major requirements in water, energy, and food. The question is, where are we going to find the extra food? Where are we going to find the extra energy? Where are we going to find the extra water? In Africa, obviously, as a continent of 50 plus countries there, is extremely susceptible to essentially any problem with water, food, and energy. With a population of 1.2 billion, 1.4 billion, essentially the continent itself, and there's some regions more than others, the continent is not really resilient and has a high level of vulnerability. And again, it depends on the country, it depends on the context, it depends where you are on the continent. But essentially, engineers, African engineers with the 21st century, need to take under consideration the growing needs for water, food, and energy in the years to come. There's no doubt about it. So how are we going to address that complexity? Well, we're going to use system thinking. And so I'm going to talk about system thinking. And the idea here is a little box there full of academics who refuse to accept system thinking. And they think that everything is linear, everything goes from A to B, until this lady here opens the door and says, oops, does it look like that in the real world? And we all know that engineering education is not always a reflection of what's happening in the real world. That's I'm coming from the field of academia, and actually I'm retiring tomorrow. I have one day to go. But very often, essentially in engineering education, traditional engineering education, young people are presented tools, but they're not always presented the reality of the world and what are those engineering projects. So system thinking is nexus thinking, and nexus thinking is system thinking. So we're going to look at a system instead of an agglomeration of problems. We're going to look at water, we're going to look at energy, we're going to look at land, we're going to look at food, education and health, but not independent of each other. We're going to look at how those different sectors interact. What's the effect of reduction of water on food? What's the reduction of water on energy? What happens if I don't have enough energy to run the pumps? So again, we are looking at nexus thinking is system thinking. We are looking at essentially interaction. We are looking at synthesis versus analysis. I'm not saying that analysis is wrong, but it's necessary but not sufficient. We need synthesis. We need to look at how things are interconnected. If I change something here, it's going to have an effect somewhere else. This here is going to have an effect here. And it may have an effect on the first sector that I started with. How do we account for that? We know that. We have seen essentially, we have seen that. I'm going to show you, hopefully if it works, a short video that explains why system thinking is critical and why when we make some decisions, very often we have unintended consequences. Let's see if that works. System thinking. And I don't know, can someone tell me if you see the video? Peter? Do you see the video?
Doctor, the video is not playing.
It's not on the screen. Hold on. Just then I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to show, for whatever reason, the video. So what about it doesn't work? Share the video. Okay, so now you should see. Do you see what do you see on the screen, Peter? Hello?
Hello,
We
it's a
just
black
see-
screen.
Sharing the screen.
Yes, it is now seen. Huh?
This
Right
is
now,
just
I'm going to turn on the video. Do you see something?
yeah, something's coming on.
Okay, all right. Look, watch this little video. It's 3 minutes. You're going to enjoy it. And essentially, it shows why system thinking is critical.
Doctor, maybe you can make it full screen.
Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria. So they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon, the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
All right. So what did you see there? I mean, that's an interesting. I hope you enjoyed this little movie. Why did I show that movie? Let me share my presentation. Why did I? Well,
if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and consider becoming a patron by making a pledge of $1 or more for each new video we create. Thank you to our patrons. We cannot make
I
this
don't
video
know
without
what's
you.
happening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Alex here. What is the business case
Oh,
for
hold on.
sustainability?
I'm sorry. I'm
there reliable
really
evidence that
really
multiplies the
sorry. I
value
don't
of a
know what's
company
going on
integrating
here.
sustainability or ADM? Turns out the answer is
Okay. All right. That thing kept on going by itself. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to share my presentation and share, and I'm going to go back to where I was there. So in showing that video there, why did I show that video to you guys? Because we start with a project. How often do we start with a project with we expect a certain solutions? We design, we plan accordingly, we develop something, and poof, at the end, we get a different answer. And that's a bit what this video was showing about. It was showing that at the beginning, they thought the problem in the community health issue had to do with malaria. They do DDT. Okay, we know at the time DDT was used essentially to kill mosquitoes. But the unintended consequences of the DDT, the design, the planning, everything was done to kill mosquitoes, led to the killing of cats, which then led to another problem, which had to do with, I don't remember, right? So how often do we have that in engineering? We start with something, We don't look at the big system. We don't look at the big picture. And as a result of that, the result at the end are worse than the solutions that we expected. Another one he also mentioned on this PowerPoint presentation is the introduction of a type of fish in Lake Victoria that took over all the other fish and created a disaster in the fishing industry in Lake Victoria, which is close to you guys. So again, why system thinking? System thinking allows us. Can you turn off your
GOU sites? There's no framework contract here.
Excuse me, Victor. Could you please turn off your phones or turn off your computers? So the systems approach recognizes that a community is essentially consists of multiple complex systems. And one key, when we deal with complexity and complex system, there's one thing that I want you to remember. It's not possible to get best solutions to a problem, only good enough solutions. It's so complex. There are so many parameters. There are so many systems and subsystems that are interacting that only good enough solutions can be created. I know for some of you who always love to create perfect solutions, I'm going to disappoint you in saying that your perfect solutions have essentially a potential of doing damage. Only good enough solutions are good enough to address complexity that is taking place here at the community level. There's no way I can understand all the systems in this diagram. There's no way I can understand how all the systems interact. I need to make some assumptions. I need to make some trade-off. I need to create synergy between different components, and I can only come up with good enough solutions. I want you to remember that. When we look at a community and we look at a project and we have a client may look like an elephant in some cases, or the project may look like an elephant. Well, for us engineers, we need to identify what's the problem. And the problem can be quite complex. If it's a water, energy, land, food problem, well, where do we start? Is it water only? No. Is it energy only? No. Is it food only? No. Is it health only? No. Is it land only? No. It's everything. So it's not essentially when we try to identify the problem, what are the root causes of the problem? It's like those 5 gentlemen there, 6 gentlemen who are all blind, and they are looking at an elephant, they are touching it, and all of them are coming up with essentially different solutions. Does it sound familiar? When you bring experts to the table, they all have a different opinion about what the problem is, and none of them have it right. So why they don't have it right? Because they are not system thinkers. They think in silos. The water expert is going to tell you it's a water problem. The energy expert is going to tell you it's an energy problem. The food expert is going to tell you it's an agricultural problem. The land expert is going to tell you it has to do with land rights. And a health expert is going to tell you about a health issue and so on. None of them will see the big picture. So what we want essentially as part of this training there, engineers of the 21st century need to be able to cut across different disciplines and look at problems more holistically. There are different types of systems. Some systems are simple, some systems are complicated, some systems are complex, and some systems are chaotic. Simple, that you have that in the lab at the university. They don't exist in nature. Complicated, well, that's a car. Or we need experts, but we know the unknowns. We know how to build cars. We know how to build airplanes. We know how to build buildings. These are complicated systems. Complex systems, we don't know the unknowns. There's a lot of ambiguity. And chaotic is complex system on steroid. Everything is going bad. There are days in our lives where life can be chaotic. And well, depending on where we are, depending on the system we have, we can come up with different practice of conflict management or management in general. In the case of complicated system, a good practice is necessary. We need to sense, analyze, and respond to the problems. In the case of chaotic system, well, we need to essentially reduce the chaos as quickly as possible and make it as complex Obvious is simple. Well, we just follow a best practice there. But again, there are very few simple systems in communities. Most of the systems we encounter, especially with human system, social system, are complex or complicated. And we all know why human beings are so complex. Another thing that we need to understand as system thinkers is that our projects depend a great deal on the mental models that are used in the design and the planning. And we're not talking about the mental models just of the engineers, but also the mental models of the community members. Projects are essentially participatory. Water, energy, land, food, health, climate change, education, and so on, are based on mental models. Mental models, according to this diagram, controls the structure of the project. Structure of the project controls the patterns of behavior. And the patterns of behavior will essentially control what you see in a project. Or vice versa, you see something going on in a community. Behind what's going on in the community, the iceberg, the top of the iceberg, 10% of the iceberg, what you see in a community is created by some patterns of behavior. The patterns of behavior are created by a certain structure in the community. Maybe it could be political structure, could be economic structure, could be decision-making. And the structure of the system is controlled by the mental models. The mental models is actually what people believe in. If they believe in something, I can tell you it's going to be quite hard for you as an engineer to get them to believe in something else. I remember quite well working in Mali, and where people did not believe in washing their hands. And we know quite well washing hands is a good form of hygiene. It cuts down on illness, talking about health. Well, those people in a community in that small village in Mali said that if you wash your hands with soap, your spirit is going to go away. Okay, I'm an engineer. I have to deal with spirits now. Nobody has trained me how to deal with spirits. How do I convince people to change their mental model so I can create a new structure in a community? I can create some patterns of behavior that are better in terms of health and essentially create the events is a much better, prosperous, resilient community. So as mental models control essentially what people are going to believe in and what people are going to do. And I think mental models, that's a huge leverage point. That's where you start. You want to change a community for better. You understand where the community is at, its capacity, its vulnerability, and you try to identify the mental models, essentially. So you change the mental models without coercing the community. In the case of the community in Mali, I could not tell people, wash your hands. That mental model did not work for them. We had to create other forms, essentially, of intervention, like a play, putting together a play, bringing a microscope and showing that there were essentially little bugs in the water and so on. And people realized, say, oh my God, if I drink that water, then then I'm going to get sick. Mental models are the most, that's your leverage point on any project. Mental model of your client. Mental model of the client may say, I don't like, solar energy because it's expensive. That's a mental model. And you say, no, solar energy is good for you because, it may cost you a little bit more money up front, but over time, essentially, it's going to more be beneficial for you, for your wallet and for the community and so on. How do you change the mental model of your client? Without changing the mental model of your client, you're not going to create the structure of your project. You're not going to change the structure of your project. You may not even get the project. And you're going to have weird forms of behavior. Keep that in mind. I think that in system thinking, a system approach recognizes that mental models essentially and the structure of projects essentially control the behavior of the people who benefit from the project. I'm going to skip that. There's a small video showing essentially the importance of mental models and how mental models can get you into trouble. Essentially, the story says you have those two buffaloes. One buffalo looks at this and say, "Oh no, this is a piece of wood." The other one say, "No, this is a crocodile." And no, this is a piece of wood. This is no, this is a crocodile. And this one here jumps on it, and guess what? It's a crocodile, and is being eaten up essentially by the crocodile. So it turns out that this here changes its mental model. Oh, no, this is a crocodile, this is not a piece of wood. And the story keeps on going by itself. So mental models are extremely important. I want you to understand that. If you intervene at the nexus level, what is the mental model? How do people use their water? How do people use their energy? How do people use their food? Where does it come from? Where do people, how do people see health? Well, do they prioritize health, essentially, the health sectors? Do they have clinic? And so the mental models essentially are critical to any intervention in any nexus whatsoever. Okay? And we need to essentially, I want to show you 2 slides there that essentially that in addition to equations, in addition to fancy finite element models and what have you there, we need to, especially when we talk with mental models, we need to deal with essentially addictive forces that are at play at the community level. It could be intolerance, fear, dogmatism, and those may sound weird to you, but I have enough experience in my life that even though the system was well designed, technically, the project essentially failed because of political competition, because of jealousy between one part of the community versus another part of the community, because of violence, because of ego, because of greed there. All projects, the success of a project depends on more than good technical design and planning. And for those of you who have practiced that, you know that better than I do. And we have some human characteristics to deal with regardless of where you are on the planet. We have limited predictability, limited certainty. We don't like to deal with complex issues. Who likes complex issues, right? Who doesn't like simple problems? Well, yes, but most problems are complex. And look at this diagram here. Look at this photo here, where essentially this person is going to the bathroom and the children essentially swim in the same water where the bathroom outlet is coming from. Well, here's a good example of a mental model. The mental model by people in that community, it's perfectly fine to swim in human waste. Well, we know quite well what are the consequences of that. How do we change that? I think as engineers, not only we have to design the hygienic system, but we also have to essentially train people to not do what you see here on this photo. Okay, so human characteristics, don't ignore human characteristics in your design, because human characteristics, some weird forms of human characteristics, can derail an entire project. System thinkers need to develop some habits. You're not going to become a system thinker overnight. You need to develop some habits. I don't have time to go through those 14 habits, but one habit is look at the forest and look at the trees. I mean, so many people, I see so many engineers looking at the trees in the forest. They are looking at these specific issues, the water tree, the energy tree, the food tree. When if you look at the community level, you should look at the entire forest. Changing your perspective is another one there. I mean, changing perspective is very important. With my students, we go through an exercise. If you take your right finger, you may want to do it with me, and you essentially create a circle. So you go clockwise with your circle like this, clockwise, right? Clockwise, clockwise, and you bring your finger down, and you end up by looking over your finger. Now you're going counterclockwise. How is that possible? It's clockwise when the finger is above my head, and it's counterclockwise. I have not done anything. I have not changed anything. It's counterclockwise as my head is above the finger. What happened there? I changed perspective. As you change perspective, you come up with different solutions. You come up with different conclusions about how the system is working. So I think these are examples of, there are all sorts of habits you can explore. If you're interested, I'll be glad to send you some information about it. But that's the kind of stuff that we need to train our students with, in addition to mathematics, linear algebra, and whatever you, physics, and so on. Habits. How do you deal? Another habit is how do you deal with conflict? Where do we train engineers about conflict in education. Conflict is going to be part of conflict. We have conflict at home, we have conflict with ourselves, we have conflict at the project, and so on. How do we deal with conflict? I think conflict understanding, conflict management, conflict analysis should be part of the body of knowledge of all engineers. A system approach recognizes feedback. There are many feedback mechanisms that are at play. Where is the chicken and the egg? Right? That's a feedback, right? Which one started first? We have many feedback issues. Water affects energy. Energy affects water. That's a feedback. Water affects health. Health affects energy. Energy affects water. That's another feedback. There are multiple feedback. It's not linear. It's all essentially closed loop, essentially system. How do we represent feedback? Here's an example, showing essentially at the community level, 3 levels of essentially sectors, and the environmental sector, the social sector, and economic sector, and all sorts of parameters essentially in each one of them. Blue, you can see that's the economic sectors, different parameters there that are all interacting. Social, all sorts of parameters that are interacting, but also interacting with the blue, and green interacting with the red and the blue. Okay, that's kind of what's happening in the community you belong to every day. You need to intervene in that community. For instance, primary energy supply. Okay, this is an energy project. Well, if you think that your energy project is just about energy, you'll be mistaken, because energy project depends on infrastructure, it depends on finance, it depends on governance, it depends on employment, and so on and so forth. There, I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's a complete mess. I agree with you that it's a mess. How am I going to handle everything? You can't. You do your best. You come up with a good enough solutions that at least takes under consideration other things beside energy. There are 2 types of tools, system tools, and some are called soft system tools, and some are hard system tools. I'm just going to talk about soft system tools. They tend to be qualitative. Hard system tools, I don't have the time to talk about them. They tend to be quantitative. Essentially, we can essentially use those tools like system dynamics and agent-based modeling and so on. And here is an example of a tool, the double causality table that you saw before. Water influences energy. Water influences food. Water influences land. Something for energy here, food and land. And the columns, essentially, water security depends on energy. Water security depends on food. Water security depends on land, and vice versa. So that's one way of looking at it. This is a soft approach. So it's all qualitative here. One way of converting that from a qualitative to a semi-quantitative is to put some levels of influence between 1 and 2. So in each box, we're going to put a number. And that number here, we decided that it can vary between -3 and +3. Each one, +3 correspond to an enabling interaction between 2 sectors. A +2 is enabling, supporting, +1 enabling, allowing, 0 neutral, -1 constraining a little bit, -2 constraining, and so on. So here's an example there where I created a matrix, the same matrix as before, but with numbers. So water resources, you can see, affects the energy security with, it's allowing energy security, not a lot. Water resources there provides essentially enabling essentially land security and food security. So we can calculate the total influence by summing up all the numbers in each row. We can calculate the total dependence by summing up the vertical columns and plot influence versus dependence. So here we have high influence and low dependence, high influence and high dependence, low influence and high dependence, low influence and low dependence. And you can see that for the case study that I was showing you, energy has the highest influence and the lowest dependence. If I have to intervene in that nexus of food, land, water, energy is the place where I'm going to intervene first. Why? Because it has the highest influence and it has the lowest dependence on the other 3. I hope you get that. So this tool here which is, I would call it semi-quantitative, essentially is based on assigning essentially some ratings, some values to all essentially interaction, how water resources interact with energy security, how water resources interact with it. And then we sum them up essentially. So water resources influences as a level of +7 of influence, energy as a level of +8 of influence, food as +2 and so on, and water security essentially depends a great deal essentially on all the others. So that's why you have this diagram here. Again, you look for this quadrant here. Where do I intervene in my system? Where are my leverage points? My leverage point in this case study is energy. Because of energy, everything depends on energy in this case study. In another case study, it could be water, if water is dominant. But in this case, energy is the dominant, essentially, sector that controls the other three. Therefore, that's the place that has the high influence and low dependence. That's the place where I'm going to put all my efforts first, knowing that by essentially intervening at the energy level, it's going to affect water, it's going to affect land, and it's going to affect food. You can use causal loop diagrams here as an example of a causal loop diagram about Syria, essentially showing essentially the connections between climate change, unrest in Syria, social political conflict, and also migration. So that's another type of representation, the soft type of representation called causal loop diagram that shows the interaction. Where do I intervene in this system? Well, climate change, I may change the climate change. I may do mitigation and adaptation. By doing that, I'm going to improve rural areas. People are not going to migrate from rural to urban or less. That will create less civil unrest, less political conflict, and less essentially migration. So we can use that to decide where to intervene in the system. Here's an example. I'm not going to go through the details, but I did that for WELFHE. WELFHE International is a causal loop diagram for young farmers in some regions of Uganda, where I looked at essentially the relationship between agribusiness and sustainable community development. We looked at access to global markets. We looked at education of the farmers. We looked at productivity and so on. And that's a diagram after visiting several of the communities there and the co-ops in Uganda. I put this diagram together to show WELFHE where to intervene in the system. Where do I intervene in the system? If I change something here, it has consequences on this, that, and that. Again, this is a systems approach to a problem. If you're interested in the SDG, this is an example of a, I'm not going to show you the demonstration, but it's a fantastic tool, analytical tool, country by country. So Uganda is not represented, but Kenya is represented. That shows how the SDGs essentially interact at the country level over time. And you can see again a diagram here showing all the 17 SDGs and multiple connections there. And obviously those connections are going to change from country to country. Another aspect of a system approach is the need to develop a methodology. A methodology that at the project level, that essentially takes you through 10 steps. First, what's the situation space? What is going on? Usually that's a pre-appraisal. You visit different communities and so on. What are the problems? Problems are water, problems are energy, problems are health, problems. We essentially map there. That leads to defining what we call a community baseline. Community baseline is about capacity, vulnerability, stakeholders, decision-making, what have you. 3, we identify the problem space. What are the problems essentially that the community is facing? And those problems are defined by the community. It's participatory, right? 4th, then we try to understand what's going on between those different issues. Are some issues more dominant than others? What controls what? Then we model essentially that landscape dynamic. We try to model and reproduce what's going on at the local level. Then 6, we explore some solutions of intervention. Some are better than others. 7, we make some decisions and we formulate a theory of change. A theory of change say, if I do this, then or else. 8, we develop an intervention strategy and operation. 9, we essentially do the implementation. And 10 is the reflective practice. It's a system-based methodology. In other words, in each level here of this methodology, you need to look at the systems approach. There are feedback mechanisms. For instance, it's possible to go from 6 to 4. Suppose you look at intervention scenarios, but you did not understand the landscape dynamics quite well. You need to come back here before you go back to 5 and you go back to 6. So there are many feedback systems. We need to recognize that the system approach essentially recognizes the participation of many different groups of stakeholders. You have the communities be important. They have their own mental models. The governments have their own mental models, some of them essentially better than others. Some government agencies may block a project. Some government agencies may facilitate a project. Some of them are constraining. Some of them are enabling. It's important to map that. Then you have outsiders. Engineers Without Borders, for instance, is an example of an outsider working in partnership with the government and the community. And in some cases, like in the case of Bidi in northern part of Uganda, you have displaced populations that add essentially to the different types of stakeholders. When we do a baseline analysis, it's about identifying who are the stakeholders, who are the partners, gender analysis, the role of men and women in the community, what's the capacity and the vulnerability at the community level, risk analysis, what are the risks that the community has faced and is likely to face, conflict analysis, who is in conflict with whom, who controls the conflict, socio-economic political analysis, and also what are the areas of leverage, where do we want, and again, that is decided by the community or in participation with the community, where do we intervene in the system, where are my leverage points, where are my mental models that I can change, because we know that in changing the mental models, I change the structure of the community. By changing the structure of the community, I change essentially the behavior of the community members, and then a better and we end up with a more resilient community at the end. So it starts with mental models. I want you to remember that you can do all sorts of finite element analysis or whatever you do there. If you don't change the mental models of your community, your own mental models too, as member of the stakeholders, your project is going to fail. So mental models essentially control structure, control behavior, and control the outcome of a project. Bunch of questions that you can identify there, but once you have identified the problems and the issues, it's important. I always use the 5 W's, or 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 W's and H. What are the problems? Why do we have problems? Who is involved in the problems and who can solve those problems? Where and when? The scale. Is it a local issue? Is it a one village issue? Is it multiple village issues? Is it the western part of Uganda issue? Is it eastern part of Uganda issue? Is it the refugee issues? And how does the problem manifest itself? And how can we address essentially those problems? These are important questions that need to be raised. So a system approach, I'm coming up to the end of my presentation. A system approach to community development helps decision makers to consider community development in an integrated manner. That's where essentially the nexus is important. It's not just a water issue. It's not an energy issue. It's not a food issue only. It's not a health issues only. It is an integrated issue. Essentially, there are multiple components to the issue there that we need to understand. The system approach gives us the opportunity to have a more flexible and adaptive and iterative and participatory essentially approach to project management and delivery. And we can anticipate the consequences of interventions. That's the theory of change. What if? if something were to, if, say, the rain, in case of the farmers, young farmers in Uganda, if the monsoon doesn't come, if the rain doesn't come, then what? What do we do? Well, it turns out that, the small farms that I visited in Uganda, they are extremely vulnerable to rain, right? And it turns out that there's water in Uganda. In fact, there's plenty of water in Uganda, not always rain, but underground water, and that is not very deep, lakes and so on. So how do we train essentially young farmers to invest in small pumping system and use essentially lake water to irrigate their land and not depend only on rain or rainwater catchment system? I did not see too many rainwater catchment system in Uganda. And it rains, what, half a meter of rain or something like that per year. It'd be nice to capture some of that water from the roof. For 1 square meter of roof, for 1 millimeter of rain, you have 1 liter, essentially, of water. Okay, so you can do the math and how much water is being wasted, essentially, in Uganda by not collecting it from roof system. They are extremely cheap and they work like a charm. They work very well. A system approach, if we do an analysis, allows us essentially to look at potential emerging issues and leverage points. Where do I intervene in the system? Here's an example very quickly of a project in Vietnam, not one of my projects, but I studied it to look at where it's a biosphere, it's a reserve, and the people were really concerned about the effect of tourism on the environment, people's livelihood, immigration, in particular, economic benefits, and the importance of the government in essentially controlling the economy of that community. So what did they do? Essentially, they followed the same methodology that I showed you. First, they identify the issues, they build capacity, they develop a system model, they identify the leverage point and systemic intervention. Here's a causal loop diagram. The red dots are places to intervene in a system. You can see that there was an intervention at the government level. Policies need to change, and also the impact of NGOs. And after that, they developed a plan of action, implementation of those actions. They looked at anticipated results, and they did some post-program evaluation. 2 slides left, which has to do with education. I think I wanted to show you today that the problems of the world, especially problems of the 21st century, require a different approach, a different way of training engineers. Again, how are we going to train the engineers in Uganda of 2030, 2040, 2050? I mean, there are some global issues that are not going to stop anytime soon. How are we going to, so we really need to reconsider, we really need to reconsider essentially the way we train engineers, not just in Uganda. Same thing in the United States. Very often, young people, mechanical engineering, they go into the mechanical engineering department. Civil engineering, they go into civil engineering department. We essentially put our students into boxes, into silos, without even telling them that those silos essentially do not even exist in the real world. So here's a conclusion. Engineering graduates, educators, and practitioners must have the skills and tools to address the global problems that our planet and humans face today or will face within the next 20 years and beyond. And it's one thing that I think that is missing in engineering education. Everywhere on the planet I go is lifelong learning. And I love this quote here about the person who graduates today and stops learning tomorrow is uneducated the day after. And I want you to remember that, lifelong learning. There's no way that in 4 years of education or 5 years of education, we can train someone to address water issues, energy issues, health issues, everything. But they can do that over a lifetime through projects and so on. But during those 4 years of education, we need to train young people to have an integrated approach, to be able to look at the importance of mental models, in addition to the technical models and mathematical models and so on. I think lifelong education in 4 years gives essentially young people the fundamentals. How do we approach our global problems on the planet? Then they will figure it out as they move along. But lifelong learning is critical. Where is lifelong learning in Uganda? Where do we get engineers to learn not after graduation, and keep learning after graduation. Again, this quote at the bottom, put it under your skin. The person who graduates today and stops learning tomorrow is uneducated the day after. I love that quote. And I'm going to finish this, maybe here's a diagram again regarding essential education. We need a new epistemology of engineering practice and education based on the idea of reflective and adaptive practice, system thinking, and holistic approach to global problems. If we can do that in 4 years of education, we will succeed because young people will be armed with essentially the right tools to essentially do lifelong learning. Last quote from Albert Einstein, significance problems we face cannot be solved with some level of we were at when we created them. The mindset, the mental models that created the problems of the past cannot solve those problems. We need some new mental models. It's like the chicken here. We need a new paradigm shift. And in that paradigm shift, it's important that people understand complexity, that the world is not simple. Yeah, of course, there are some issues that are simple that can be addressed, but the vast majority of the issues that we are facing on the planet, whether it is climate change, urbanization, population growth, contamination of water and so on, require essentially more integrated solutions and require that embracing complexity. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. I'm sure you are really confused. Good. Again, confusion is always a good place to start. Where do we start? Where do we go from here? Maybe Peter, maybe we can offer some short courses to engineers interested in system thinking. I only looked at the tip of the iceberg, literally, in 1 hour. There's only one thing. I can only do a few things, but I wanted to create your awareness. And that your awareness that engineering education is not just about technology. It's not just about a degree. It's lifelong learning, and it involves multiple disciplines that essentially all interact with engineering projects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard, for this presentation. I think it is very, very thought-provoking with quite a number of questions and probably, as you said, maybe some confusion here and there, and maybe, yes, a good way to start. Yes, so many questions. We need peace in the communities that we serve. We need to think about how we train our students and retooling. The challenges ahead of us are immense. 2050 is going to be difficult, and probably maybe it has started being difficult. Our communities are faced with multiple complex systems. Do we know what is happening, and how are we reacting to this? How are we responding to this? What are the patterns? Is it the evil spirits? How are we responding to the evil spirits? Are we the right people to respond to the evil spirits? We need to change perspectives. Are we enabling? So many questions. The questions of why, the questions of what, who, where, when, and how. Very important questions. Very interesting. If you are educated today, you are graduated today, and you stop planning tomorrow, you are uneducated after. Very, very important. And I must say, I want to thank the Water Resources Institute for always organizing these webinars on a monthly basis. And we do appreciate the opportunity to be part of this, training. And again, of course, one very critical end to this is, the significant problems we face today cannot be solved by the same level of thinking when we created them. Very, very important. Yes, so now it's an opportunity that we have for the participants, for the colleagues who are online in Uganda and elsewhere, to ask questions. And I have a few questions in the chat line. Probably I will begin with those. Dr. Bernard probably will take note of that just in consideration of the time that we have. We may not be able to read everything, but at the same time, maybe to have a question from everyone. So Nimra Abra, climate change activist. The question is, how can innovation in technology be leveraged to improve the integration of water, energy, land, food security, health, and education systems in communities? The other question is, I read the other questions from Victor Kazmir.
Let's do one question at a time, Peter. I think because I only have one brain cell, and it's 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So I can take one question at a time. I think that there's a really important question. How can innovation and technology be leveraged to improve the integration of water, energy, and food, health, and education system? That's a really good idea. I think that there's technology and technology. I mean, there's modern technology that can certainly address those, but there's also what it's called appropriate technology, small scale technology. I noticed that when I visited the villages in Uganda on this heifer project, people don't need much. They don't have much money, number one, to invest in technology. So they can, but what I also found out, a lot of creativity. Everywhere I go, everywhere I went in Uganda, I found creative people. They may not always have a PhD or master's degree or BS degree or whatever, but they know how to grow things. They have learned from ancestors and from parents how to deal with drought. They know how they need some basic technology that they can afford. That is essentially, it's the whole field of appropriate technology. Technology that is reliable. Technology that is essentially affordable. Technology that local people can understand and maintain. I mean, there's a video that I showed to Peter, what's called Water of the Yole, about technology, where the government came along and put some water pumps without telling people how to maintain the water pumps. Not only that, but people had no money to maintain the water pumps. Guess what? It's like your car, a water pump after 6 months or 8 months needs to be maintained. Nobody knew had a clue about it. Sometimes it's the technology that is not appropriate. I think that sometimes it's the lack of communication between the people who provide the technology and the people who use the technology. It really depends, on context and scale and so on. Technology, yes, but what kind of technology? Is it sustainable? Is it appropriate? Does it create conflict in a community? Does it create capacity? Does it increase the vulnerability? These are open-ended questions that obviously are going to depend on the community where you are in the world and so on. But I remember the young people, the young farmers that I visited in the community, they were incredible. They had vision. They didn't have any money, but they had vision. They knew what to do. They could fix this, they could fix that. And I think that many of our young engineers, whether in Uganda, I think it's in the spirit of Engineers Without Borders, it's for young people in universities in Uganda to go and visit or work on projects in remote communities in Uganda. They will learn tons in addition to what they learn in the classroom. Classroom is mostly books and equations and all that stuff. But you go to the field, and some of you know that better than I do. You go to the field, you don't have the books, you don't have your computer, you don't have anything, and you have to solve a problem. It's a great way to learn about engineering and how basic technology can change people's lives.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I'll ask you 2 questions from the chat, and then return to Water Resources Institute to ask questions from the audience, and then thereafter close. There is a question in the chat, and says, given that solar-powered irrigation systems can be prohibitively expensive for rural communities and individual farmers, what innovative financing models or support mechanisms are available and could be developed to make technologies more accessible and affordable?
That's a good point. We talked about appropriate technology. If you look at the solar water pumping, it can be expensive. There's no doubt about it. One of the issues that were raised, and it was buried in the complex diagram I showed you about farmers in Uganda and so on, is how do young people get a loan? How do they have access to a loan? You need funding to get started, right? Even with basic technology. Sometimes it's not much, but sometimes it requires, a solar water pumping system, depending how deep the water table is and what have you there, can be expensive. And so how do young farmers, I remember we talked about that, how can young farmers in Uganda get a loan or work essentially in partnership with several other co-ops and so on, so that they share essentially the cost and they share the resources and they share the benefits? That is more economic model. I don't know much about it, but that's a really good question. You need some initial capital, there's some capital cost, right? I mean, no matter what. Where in Uganda can somebody at a rural level get essentially initial financing? I don't know.
Yeah, the last question from the chat, and then I'll turn to Francis, is what role does education and capacity building play in the adoption and maintenance of solar technologies? How can we better integrate these elements into community development projects to ensure their success?
Well, I think it's that, I think that, I said, Peter, it's almost like what Engineers Without Borders would do in creating chapters, essentially, of Engineers Without Borders in Uganda, in different universities in Uganda. Last time I came to Uganda was in February or March. We visited several universities where, again, the mental model there, so when you talk to the deans, it was like, hey, your students need to learn about solar energy, need to learn about water pumping and so on, hands-on. I think that the field of water pumping, solar energy and so on are great, essentially, fields for students in the lab to build simple systems and understand the fundamentals. Those simple systems can be implemented in the field. Good example is biogas digester. People say, biogas digesters are expensive. I went to Nepal one time, I worked in Nepal, and there are 10,000 biogas digesters that were installed in communities in Nepal. You're talking about remote communities in Nepal. What's a biogas digester there? Essentially, it's a big, imagine digging a trench, you put essentially a kind of a top, we create a sausage. Close it at both sides. You have a tube that goes from the bathroom to the sausage, and you have on the outlet, you have essentially gas that is generated. Cost of that system, $50 maximum, $100 maximum. Works like a charm. I remember visiting a house there, and they gave us some tea. They boiled some tea for us, using essentially the gas coming from the human waste in a biogas digester. Well, it'd be nice maybe for students in the university to build a biogas digester. You can think of competition where, the students essentially fill the biogas digester, and the group that creates the most gas essentially wins a prize or something like that. It's kind of creepy, but where do we train? I think hands-on training of young people in photovoltaic, basics of photovoltaic, basics of biogas digesters, basic of water filtration, basic of rainwater catchment system. I think that students should have those instead of another course in mathematics. I'm not putting down mathematics, I love mathematics, but do they need another course of triple integral, solutions and differential equations, where instead they could learn essentially hands-on, they could practice, on small-scale system. The small-scale system can be essentially, and how do you go from a small-scale system to a small business, to a small enterprise, right? I mean, you can talk, and then that small enterprise will generate enough funding to create more system. I think that there's untapped potential there. Because we always think that engineers are not going to do any real work in communities and so on, that engineers always love some big systems and so on. That's not true. I mean, yes, in some cases we need large infrastructure, there's no doubt about it. And large infrastructure can be really appropriate for Kampala. But is it really appropriate for a small village in Uganda? No, a different type of technology. So we need to have a spectrum, essentially, of solutions, of technical solutions. Some are more appropriate than others, and decide what's appropriate here versus what's appropriate there.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. Can we have some questions from the other audience online? Please feel free to raise up your hand. In the meantime, as we prepare, there is a question, and Aisha, please ask your question.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning. It's such a great information. My question, I'm a social scientist, and I'm also a water resources enthusiast. So as a sociologist, I am very concerned on how social scientists can enhance the role of engineering, the work of engineers, and as we co-create solutions that are for people and technologies that are usable and are understandable by the people, such that we are able to create, resilient communities when it comes to climate change and water issues, health issues of the environment, of the people and the animals, things like that. So that interconnection, which I could call in terms like, citizen science and One Health, those are things that we would like to encourage engineers to choose to use, also environment scientists, such that we are able to move forward sustainably. So yeah, my question is, how can sociologists really enhance these roles and of the great work that the engineers are doing?
And that's a really good question. Thank you so much, Aisha. I mean, I'm glad you are a social scientist, and I hope there are some non-engineers also who are essentially attending this presentation. Because I think that many of the problems are, again, if you ask most people what engineering is about, it's about technology. And I hate that answer. Yes, technology is part of the equation, but it's about people. Number one, and in fact, all the projects that we are doing as with Engineers Without Borders, it's about health. It's about what type of health, physical health, of course, but also mental health. And then I think it's very critical as engineers are being educated for problems of the 21st century, that they take courses in social humanistic electives, where they learn about how people think. Mental models, there are no equations for mental models. Mental models, I mean, understanding a mental model, why people do what they do, the role of men and women in the community there. That's the field of social science. So how do we train engineers? How do we get engineers to be sensitive to non-technical issues that are as critical, even more critical than technology? You can how many read several examples of some community, some engineers coming outside and to community. The women were always gathering at the well, and so those great engineers came and say, hey, you guys need a solar water pump. Okay. They come back 6 months later, the solar water pump was completely disconnected. They went back to the women and say, hey, why did you disconnect the solar water pump? It's easier for you. You don't have to, fill up a bucket and so on. I say, no, you forgot that this place where the well is, it's where we learn from each other. We learn who is born in a community. We learn who died in community. And essentially by putting that stupid pump and solar panel, you essentially removed our interaction. You affected our interaction. That's a social impact there. That's bad engineering, even though it was well designed. I'm sure the pump was good, the solar system was good and so on. But the women could not communicate. And with no communication, it meant a lot to them, right? So that's social science, Aisha. And then I'm glad that you're raising that. How do we train engineers to take into consideration human, human behavior? And human, God knows, I mean, we all know that human behavior can be crazy. And all it takes, I mean, I'm sure all of you have had that experience. You have a great project, you go to a community and there's one person in that community, a big ego, who wants to control everything. And until essentially you have spent time with that person and have got them to change their mental models, nothing will happen.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That's a very great response to bring us to the same page as scientists who are innovating science that enhances humanity. Yeah, so that's very good.
Absolutely. I mean, social science to me is as important as engineering. The two, especially when you do community work. I mean, if you do work for Boeing and but when if you look at Uganda, engineers who are working in the field and working in communities, whether it's in Kampala and Tebe, small village, they have to deal with people. Sorry, folks, as engineers, we have to deal with people, and we better. Where do we learn how to deal with people? We don't.
Maximo Tinomhanji, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much, Dr. Bernard, for the wonderful presentation. I'm Engineer Maximo Tinomhanji, and I work with the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. So I was very impressed with the presentation, and I liked the 4 quadrants on the dependence and influence of the linkage of the nexus. And you came up with one of the quadrants on energy, where you indicated that energy has high independence and high influence and low dependence.
Right.
And then you also indicated the scoring matrix ranging from +3 and to the other side. So I was wondering how this is arrived at, and probably request you to throw more light on this. And if there is also more literature I could read to appreciate this more, especially to understand how subjective or objective that matrix is, because it's a stakeholder-driven process, and for different river basins, the influence of one of these items over the others may really change. It may not be a constant linkage and influence of different elements over the others. And also the dependence may also be different in some river basins. So how do we address this, and especially come up with the matrix that really works for different river basins, and have a clear understanding of the influence and dependence levels for us to think systematically to promote the approach of system thinking. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Maximo. Thank you. That's a really great question. That influence dependence essentially diagram. I like it because that's we always look for things that have the most influence on the least amount of dependence, right? That makes sense. And how do we get that? I showed you a scale ranging between -3 and +3. -3 is most constraining and +3 is most enabling. That scale could have been between -10 and +10, between -5 and +5. It's really your own essentially scale that you select essentially, but for each level, you need to identify what it means, most constraining. What does it mean, most constraining to the people? Is it most constraining to the environment? Is it most constraining to the economy? Is it most constraining to health? So, that it was a very simplified. I didn't want to go into the details because I didn't have the time. But that table there between -3 and +3 requires essentially a description of each level. A neutral, what does a neutral state essentially for energy mean, right? What's the most constraining for energy? Well, maybe because people, the energy systems work 3 hours a day, every day, and they break down. It's really most constraining, right? Because you cannot develop any business there. +3 would be essentially a steady state type of energy where you have essentially energy that is available all the time, and therefore the economy will, business development will flourish and so on. So you need to have your own kind of, I just show you an example between -3 and +3, but for each level between -3 to +3, you need to have a clear description of what it means for energy, what it means for food, what it means for water, what it means for health, what it means for education also.
Thank you. I will have a question from Masa Kajiri, followed by a Tridam Singusi, and then I'll go back to the chat with where there is an interesting question. Please, Masa, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much, Peter, for this platform and an amazing presentation from Dr. Bernard. And it's nice to hear that, Dr. Bernard, you've been at one time in Nepal. I was there in 2004 during my postgrad at Tribhuvan University, and I was involved with the BSP Nepal biogas project.
Good.
And
Thank
from
you, Masa.
there, I came to train technicians in Kenya, in Nigeria, and other places. My
20
question
years
is
ago,
this.
20 years ago. Huh? I was.
Yes,
you were
as a,
young.
yeah, as a young student. Now,
That's right.
I'm so amazed by this platform, and I could see the potential that as a group we have, and what we could learn from each other, and what we could take to other countries. Recently, I was involved in looking at a baseline in one of the states in northern Nigeria on water. And I realized, hearing from where I'm coming from here in Kenya, the step we have taken forward as water engineers, especially from water harvesting, water treatment, and distribution. And this, I note where we are at the smart water metering and billing and all that, that helps a lot to cut a lot of wasteful water, the non-revenue water and all that. My question is on how could we, as this platform with the WRI and Engineers Without Borders, how could we help other African countries that are quite lagging behind, like the state where I've been, and I realized their hardware water systems are really broken, but they might need our intervention. And at the same time, even for simple sanitation systems, like what we were talking about, the biogas systems that we could install even for their waste, and also the water systems, getting them up to par with other countries like Kenya and Uganda, where maybe we are at a higher level. And how could we borrow from people in this platform, from engineers in this platform? Last September here in Kenya, we brought in some engineers from Brazil who have a very simple system of using local materials to make underground water harvesting systems. And we are just about to roll out here in Kenya. How could we come together and see this also happens to other countries within the continent? Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Nice to reconnect after 20 years. No, I agree with you. I think that WRI and Engineers Without Borders are in a unique position, in my opinion. I'm just going to throw some crazy ideas there. To develop a portfolio of case studies around essentially small-scale technology for water, energy, land, food, showing essentially how a systems approach can help an integrated approach or system approach can help in solving some local problems. Developing a series of a portfolio of case studies. Those portfolio of case studies can then be presented to other countries in the region. And they're obviously going to change, the solutions, but at least it's a place to start. For us engineers, we always like to know what other people have done. Learn from others. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't have the time to reinvent the wheel. I mean, our problems we are facing in the 21st century are fast moving. Look at climate change, right? We cannot do projections over the next few years because we don't know what we don't know. Again, we're talking about complexity there. So I think that there's a need, in my opinion, and I try to do that with WELFHE, but we're not interested, to have essentially a portfolio of case studies, simple case studies at the rural level, at the urban level, at the peri-urban level, showing essentially how to approach the issues in those different essentially contexts and at different scales. That would be my take. And then from that, it's going to multiply very quickly, and other regions of Africa, or East Africa even, to start with, could benefit a great deal from that. And exchange. I mean, how do we create a platform of exchange? I love what you talked, Martha, about colleagues from Brazil. People in Brazil are facing similar issues, but they have developed some solutions that benefited people in Kenya, and vice versa. So how do we create a South-South type of essentially connection, learning from each other, and developing solutions that work across in different contexts and at different scales? Scale is a big issue because scale is not linear, right? I mean, you cannot say, okay, the community is twice as big, therefore they need twice as much water. Yes, maybe, but there are other parameters there. Because it's non-linear, scaling can be extremely difficult.
Thank you, Bernard and Martha. Edrida Musinguzi, could you please ask your question?
Good afternoon, all. My name is Edrida Musinguzi, as we already said, and I'm from Uganda, Ministry of Water and Environment, and I'm a sociologist. I want to thank Bernard for this great presentation. The conversation around systems thinking is really exciting. And this is going to improve on the manuals, documentations that we've been developing. Because when you look at some of the studies, especially the surveys during feasibility studies and design development, it has not been incorporating the system awareness analysis. And sometimes even whatever is available in those documents, you find that the engineers don't use the findings in those documents. So I see this system awareness analysis.
Oh, I cannot hear you.
If it is, if it then it can be translated. My network is bad. Hello?
Well, on and off. I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yeah, for a minute or so, the network was not, but it's working. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was appreciating the system awareness analysis. And this one is going to improve the studies we've been conducting during feasibility and the design development level. But I was saying that in some cases, you find that the engineers are not well grounded in this system and our systems thinking. So I don't know the strategies we can put in place to ensure that the system thinking involving all the aspects, the social aspects, the human aspects could be incorporated and translated in the design of feasibility study documents. Equally, I want to thank our Engineers Without Borders. They've been instrumental in the development of solar, the manuals for the solar systems. Some are documents related to O&M, and of course, this hinges greatly on the socio-economic studies if they are adequately conducted. I thank you.
No, I fully agree with you. I mean, very few engineers are especially exposed to system thinking, system tools, doing their undergraduate education or even graduate education. I think maybe WRI or other organizations in Uganda could provide essentially a professional training in system thinking. It doesn't take much, believe me. I mean, I've given a training like that to folks in Washington, D.C. At the beginning, they were obviously resistant to the idea of learning something new. But very quickly, they realized the value proposition of system thinking. I think system thinking, the 10-hour training in system thinking would change people completely. I mean, the way they're going to, doesn't mean that regular thinking is bad. Actually, you have to be careful. I'm not saying that system thinking is replacing traditional thinking. It's another way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at communities. So it complements not traditional thinking, So no, thank you for your observation, Adriana. Thank you so much. Well, we're coming to it's almost 4 o'clock my time here, so I need to go to bed.
Yes, two last questions from the chat. Is the mental model affected by the level of education? I have noticed a lot of vandalism in government projects besides sensitization. The other question is, who is the engineer, social scientist, financial analyst of the 2030-2050? Thank you. Those are the two questions, I think.
Second question, I don't know. That I cannot answer because that's really those people are somewhere in Uganda need to be found. But I think the first question is mental model depends on education. Yes and no. I think that of course people coming from say Kampala and going to a small community have a different mental model than the local farmers. But I think that the solution is in between. It's a kind of a weighted function. The mental models of the local people, even though they may not have a high education, they know how to live. They know how to survive. They can, I think each time I go somewhere in community, I learn tons of stuff. So I think that development is a two-way street. We learn from each other. It's not, the people coming from the outside. In the case of Africa, for a long time, it was people coming from Western Europe going to Africa and saying, we know what to do. Well, really, I mean, look at the damage, the consequences of that approach. Really awful, very bad. So I think the same applies to within the country where people with different level of education, we look at the problem differently. I mean, all of us, we have right now we have 70 people. We're all looking at the tree, at the same tree. We would look at the tree quite differently. We would draw the tree quite differently. So we have different ways of looking at the tree based on our education, where we come from. We have seen trees before, what have you there. I think the same thing applies to community development. I think that there's not just one mental model that is better than the others. It's kind of, I think the challenge is to find a common ground between the outsiders and the insiders and find a solution that works for both.
Thank you, Bernard, for your responses to these questions. From my side, it was an honor to moderate. I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I want to turn this now to the Water Resources Institute. Over to you, colleagues at the Water Resources Institute.
Thank you, Peter.
For the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Peter, for moderating. Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard Amadei. I want to request the team online to join me and thank you. If they're able to clap, if they're able to wave. It has been a very, very, very big and great presentation. Very thought-provoking, system thinking, really the way to go. And the way you have delivered it, very, very inspiring. So I do hope that everybody has picked very, very good messages from here. So on behalf of the Water Resources Institute and the Ministry of Water and Environment in general, we really want to thank you as always for sharing with us. You have shared with us even in the previous session during the Uganda Water and Environment Week. But this has really been a very good presentation. So thank you again, Engineers Without Borders, USA and East Africa. I want to request those who would want to share with us the way Dr. Amadei has shared, come forward, inform the Water Resources Institute Secretariat. You'll be scheduled so that we can learn from you. And that's why these webinars have been established. Every last Friday of the month from 11 to 1 p.m., we want to hear from you. Thank you very much and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard.
Okay.
And the team from the Water Resources Institute, thank you very much, Gwendolyn, Francis, and the rest of the team for organizing.
It was great. Thank you so much. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Hope to see you soon.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Right. Again.